The crack of ice splitting through the frozen silence made Quinn Westfield pull his horse to an immediate halt, every instinct screaming danger as he surveyed the white expanse before him in the dying light of that brutal Montana afternoon in February 1884. He had been riding hard from Del Rio, the small outpost town nestled in the valley below, carrying medicine for old Thomas Harrington's winter fever, but something about that sound made his blood run cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then he heard it again, followed by a scream that cut through the wind like a knife through canvas. Without thinking, Quinn spurred his bay gelding forward, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he raced toward the edge of what the locals called Mirror Lake, a deceptively peaceful body of water that claimed at least one life every winter when someone underestimated the ice. There, maybe 50 yards from the shore, he could see her, a figure in dark leather and fur, thrashing in the black water where the ice had given way beneath her weight. Even from this distance, he could see the way her movements were becoming sluggish, the cold stealing her strength with every passing second. Quinn threw himself from his saddle, his boots hitting the frozen ground hard as he assessed the situation with the quick thinking that had kept him alive through 3 years of cattle drives and 2 harsh Montana winters. The ice near the shore looked solid enough, but he could see the spider web of cracks radiating out from where the girl had fallen through, and he knew he had maybe minutes before hypothermia took her under for good. He grabbed the coiled rope from his saddle, his fingers clumsy in the cold as he tied one end around a sturdy pine tree at the water's edge. The other end he secured around his own waist, knowing that if the ice gave way beneath him too, at least someone might find their bodies come spring. It was not a comforting thought, but it was practical, and Quinn had always been a practical man. The ice groaned beneath his weight as he began to inch forward on his belly, distributing his weight as evenly as possible. He could hear the girl's breathing now, harsh and ragged, punctuated by words in a language he did not understand but whose desperation needed no translation. "Hold on," he called out, his voice rough from the cold and the fear that was clawing at his throat. "Just hold on, I'm coming." Her eyes found his across the ice, and even in her terror, he could see they were the darkest brown he had ever seen, almost black in the fading light. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with long black hair that was already starting to freeze in the water around her. She was Lakota, he realized, from one of the bands that still moved through this territory despite the government's best efforts to confine them all to reservations. The ice cracked again beneath him, and Quinn froze, holding his breath as he waited to see if it would hold. When nothing happened, he continued forward, each movement deliberate and controlled despite the way his heart was hammering against his ribs. "Take the rope," he said when he was close enough to throw the end to her. "Wrap it around your arms." She understood him, or at least understood his intention because her shaking hands reached for the rope, but her fingers were too numb to grip it properly. Quinn watched in horror as it slipped from her grasp once, then twice, and he could see consciousness starting to fade from her eyes. "No," he said, and there was something fierce in his voice that seemed to cut through her delirium. "Stay with me. Try again." This time, when he threw the rope, she managed to loop it around one arm, and that was enough. Quinn began to pull, inch by agonizing inch, his muscles screaming in protest as he dragged her through the broken ice toward more solid ground. The rope bit into his waist, and he could feel the cold seeping through his heavy coat and wool shirt, but he did not stop. When she was close enough, he reached out and grabbed her arm, hauling her up onto the ice beside him. She was shaking violently now, her lips blue, and Quinn knew they were not out of danger yet. Hypothermia could kill as surely as drowning, and they were still on unstable ice in the middle of a Montana winter with darkness falling fast. He pulled her against his chest, using his body to shield her from the worst of the wind as he began the slow journey back to shore. The ice protested every movement, but it held, and when his boots finally hit solid ground, Quinn let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. His horse had wandered a few yards away, spooked by all the commotion, but it came when he whistled, well trained despite its nervousness. Quinn lifted the girl into the saddle first, then mounted behind her, wrapping his arms around her to keep her upright as he turned the horse toward the only shelter he knew in this area, his own cabin about 2 miles north. She was barely conscious now, her body going limp against his as the cold and exhaustion took their toll. Quinn kept talking to her, a steady stream of words that probably made no sense, but the sound seemed to keep her tethered to consciousness. "Stay with me," he said over and over. "Just a little further. You're going to be fine. Stay with me." The ride to his cabin felt like it took hours instead of the 20 minutes it actually was. By the time the small log structure came into view, Quinn could barely feel his own fingers, and the girl had stopped shivering, which he knew was a bad sign. The body gave up shivering when it was too cold to continue, when it started shutting down to preserve the vital organs. He dismounted in a rush, pulling her down from the saddle and carrying her toward the door. His cabin was small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn bed, a table with 2 chairs and not much else, but it was warm and dry, and right now that was all that mattered. The fire had burned down to embers while he had been gone, and Quinn cursed as he laid the girl on his bed, still wrapped in her soaking wet furs. He needed to get her dry and warm, and he needed to do it fast. He built up the fire first, coaxing the embers back to life with kindling and patience he did not feel, until flames were crackling and spreading heat through the small space. Then he turned to the girl, steeling himself for what needed to be done. Her clothes had to come off. There was no way around it. Wet clothing would only continue to draw heat from her body, and she would die if he let modesty get in the way of practicality. Quinn had never undressed a woman before, had never been with a woman in that way despite his 24 years, and this was not exactly how he had imagined the first time might go. He worked quickly and efficiently, peeling away the layers of wet leather and fur, trying not to think about the smooth brown skin he was revealing or the way his hands trembled as he worked. When she was down to nothing, he wrapped her in every dry blanket he owned, then set about rubbing her arms and legs, trying to restore circulation and warmth. Her breathing was shallow, her heartbeat thread and rapid when he pressed his fingers to her throat to check. Quinn had seen hypothermia before, had lost a fellow ranch hand to it his first winter in Montana, and he knew the next few hours would determine whether this girl lived or died. He stripped off his own wet coat and boots, hanging them near the fire to dry, then climbed into the bed beside her, pulling her cold body against his warm one. It was the fastest way to transfer heat, he told himself, ignoring the way his pulse kicked up at the intimate contact. This was about survival, nothing more. She stirred slightly, murmuring something in her own language, and Quinn found himself responding in English, his voice low and soothing. "You're safe," he said. "I've got you. You're going to be fine." He did not know if she understood him, but her body seemed to relax slightly against his, and he took that as a good sign. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin, and fresh snow began to fall, covering their tracks and the evidence of their desperate race from the lake. Quinn held her through the night, monitoring her breathing and her heartbeat, adjusting the blankets, adding wood to the fire when it burned low. Somewhere around midnight, she began to shiver again, violent tremors that shook the bed, and Quinn felt hope bloom in his chest because shivering meant her body was warming up, was fighting back. By dawn. Her breathing had evened out, and some color had returned to her lips and cheeks. Quinn finally let himself drift into a light sleep, exhausted from the physical and emotional toll of the rescue, his arms still wrapped protectively around the stranger in his bed. He woke to the sound of horses outside his cabin, multiple horses, and his eyes snapped open to find pale morning light filtering through the small window. The girl was still asleep beside him, her breathing deep and regular now, definitely out of danger. Quinn carefully extracted himself from the blankets, wincing at how stiff his muscles were, and grabbed his dry clothes from where they hung near the fireplace. He was pulling on his boots when a firm knock sounded at the door, authoritative and expectant. Quinn ran a hand through his hair, trying to make himself presentable, very aware that he had a naked native girl in his bed and armed men outside his door, and this could go badly in about 100 different ways. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with a Lakota warrior who radiated authority despite his weathered face showing at least 50 years. The man's eyes were sharp and assessing, taking in everything from Quinn's disheveled appearance to the smoke rising from his chimney. Behind him were 5 other warriors, all mounted, all watching Quinn with expressions that ranged from suspicious to openly hostile. "You are the man who pulled my daughter from the ice," the older man said, and his English was perfect, barely accented. It was not a question. Quinn's mind raced. This was the girl's father, then, and from the deference the other warriors showed him, probably a chief or someone close to it. He chose his words carefully. "Yes, sir," he said. "She fell through the ice on Mirror Lake yesterday evening. I brought her here because it was the closest shelter." The chief's eyes narrowed slightly. "She is here now. She's asleep," Quinn said. "The cold nearly killed her. She needs rest." For a long moment the chief said nothing, just studied Quinn with those sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. Then he nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "My name is Grey Hawk Kingsley," he said. "My daughter is Graceful Rain Kingsley. You have saved her life, and for that my people are in your debt." The formal words sat strangely in the cold morning air, and Quinn was not entirely sure what they meant in practical terms. He knew enough about Lakota culture to know that debts of honor were taken seriously, but he had no idea what came next. "I'm Quinn Westfield," he said. "And I don't need any debt. I just did what anyone would have done." Grey Hawk's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been approval flickering across his weathered features. "Not anyone," he said. "Many men in your town would have let a Lakota girl drown rather than risk their own lives. This I know." Quinn could not argue with that. He had heard the way some of the men in Del Rio talked about the native people, the casual cruelty and dismissal of their humanity. It made his stomach turn, but he was just one man, and there was little he could do to change minds that were set in their hatred. "She should stay here today at least," Quinn said. "She needs to recover her strength before traveling." Grey Hawk nodded slowly. "I will leave 2 of my men to watch over her honor," he said, and there was something pointed in the way he said it that made Quinn's face heat despite the cold. "I would never," Quinn started, but Grey Hawk held up a hand. "I know," he said simply. "If I thought you would already be dead. But appearances matter, and my daughter's reputation must be protected." It was a reasonable request, and Quinn nodded his agreement. 2 of the warriors dismounted, taking up positions outside the cabin door, and Grey Hawk prepared to leave with the others. "I will return this evening," the chief said. "We will speak more then." Quinn watched them ride away, trying to process everything that had just happened. In the space of 12 hours, his simple life as a ranch hand and occasional courier had become complicated in ways he could not have imagined. He turned back to his cabin, where a native princess, because that was essentially what she was, lay sleeping in his bed under the watchful eyes of her people's warriors. This was going to be interesting. Inside, Graceful Rain was beginning to stir, her eyelids fluttering as consciousness slowly returned. Quinn moved to the stove, starting coffee and putting together a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and salt pork, the best he could manage with his limited supplies. He heard her gasp, a sharp intake of breath, and turned to find her sitting up in bed, clutching the blankets to her chest as she took in her surroundings with wide, frightened eyes. "Easy," Quinn said, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. "You're safe. You fell through the ice and I brought you here. Your father was just here. He's coming back this evening." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, putting together the pieces of what must have happened. When she spoke, her English was good, though more heavily accented than her father's. "You saved my life," she said, and there was wonder in her voice as if she could not quite believe it. "I did what anyone would do," Quinn said, echoing his earlier words to her father. "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone." Then her eyes widened as she seemed to become aware of her state of undress beneath the blankets. "My clothes. They were soaking wet," Quinn explained, feeling his face heat again. "I had to get them off you or you would have died from the cold. They're drying by the fire. I didn't." "I was respectful." Graceful Rain studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "I believe you," she said. "I can feel that you are a good man." Something about the way she said it, with such simple conviction, made Quinn's chest tight. He busied himself with the coffee, pouring 2 cups and bringing one to her. She took it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin and inhaling the steam. "Thank you," she said softly. "For my life. For your kindness, thank you," Quinn nodded, not trusting himself to speak. There was something about this woman, this brave, beautiful woman who had nearly died yesterday, that was affecting him in ways he did not quite understand. He barely knew her, had only met her in the most dramatic of circumstances, and yet he found himself wanting to know everything about her, to hear her voice say his name, to see her smile. He was in trouble, and he knew it. They spent the day in an oddly comfortable companionship. Quinn gave Graceful Rain one of his shirts to wear while her clothes continued to dry, and though it hung on her like a dress, it was warm and decent. She told him about herself, about growing up as the daughter of a chief, about the pressure and responsibility that came with that role. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had raised her with the help of her aunts and the other women of their band. She had been crossing the lake because it was faster than going around, trying to get to a sacred place on the far side where her people went to pray. The ice had looked solid, had held for others who had crossed earlier in the week, but there must have been a weak spot, a place where the current ran faster beneath the surface and kept the ice thin. "I should have been more careful," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "My father warned me." "Everyone warned me, but I thought I knew better." "We all make mistakes," Quinn said. "What matters is that you survived." She looked up at him then, and the full force of those dark eyes hit him like a physical blow. "Because of you," she said. "I survived because of you." Quinn had to look away, overwhelmed by the intensity of her gratitude and something else, something that felt dangerously like attraction sparking between them. He told himself it was just the heightened emotions of their situation, the strange intimacy of their circumstances, but he could not quite make himself believe it. He told her about his own life, about growing up in Kansas as the son of a farmer who had died when Quinn was 16, leaving him and his mother to manage the farm alone. When she had remarried 2 years later, to a good man who treated them both well, Quinn had decided to head west, to make his own way in the world. He had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, and now as a courier and general laborer for the people of Del Rio, taking whatever work came his way. "You have no family here?" Graceful Rain asked, and there was something sad in her voice. "No," Quinn admitted, "but I have friends, good people who have been kind to me." "You are alone," she said, and it was not a question. She understood, he realized. Despite being surrounded by her people, despite having a father who clearly loved her, she understood what it was to feel alone in the world. The day passed quickly, marked by conversation and comfortable silences, by simple shared meals and the quiet intimacy of two people getting to know each other. The warriors outside remained at their posts, occasionally checking in to make sure their chief's daughter was well but otherwise leaving them in peace. When evening came and Gray Hawk returned as promised, Quinn felt an unexpected reluctance to see Graceful Rain leave. She had changed back into her own clothes, now dry and warm from hours near the fire, and she looked every inch the chief's daughter, beautiful and proud and completely out of Quinn's reach. Gray Hawk studied them both carefully as he entered the cabin, his sharp eyes missing nothing, and Quinn wondered what the older man saw. Did he see the way Quinn's eyes followed his daughter? Did he see the flush in Graceful Rain's cheeks when she looked at her rescuer? "My daughter tells me you have been a perfect gentleman," Gray Hawk said, and though his tone was neutral, Quinn had the feeling he was being tested somehow. "Your daughter is a remarkable woman," Quinn said carefully. "It has been an honor to know her." Graceful Rain smiled at that, a beautiful, genuine smile that made Quinn's heart skip a beat. Gray Hawk saw it, Quinn was certain, but the chief's expression remained unreadable. "You have saved my daughter's life," Gray Hawk said formally. "Among my people, this creates a bond, a debt that must be honored." "What would you ask of me, Quinn Westfield?" Quinn had not expected this, had not thought beyond getting Graceful Rain warm and safe. The idea that he could ask for something, that he was entitled to a reward, felt wrong somehow. "I don't need anything," he said. "I'm just glad she's safe." Gray Hawk's eyes narrowed slightly. "A man who asks for nothing is either a fool or a saint," he said. "Which are you?" "Neither," Quinn said honestly. "I'm just a man who did what was right." For the first time, Gray Hawk smiled, and it transformed his weathered face into something almost gentle. "A good answer," he said. "Perhaps the best answer." He paused, seeming to consider something, then continued. "My people are camped in the valley to the west, beyond the Pine Ridge. We will be there for another moon, until the weather breaks and we can travel north to our summer grounds. You would be welcome to visit us if you wish. To check on my daughter's recovery, of course." It was an invitation and a test, Quinn realized. An opportunity to prove his intentions were honorable, or to reveal them as something else. He met Gray Hawk's eyes squarely. "I would like that," he said, "if Graceful Rain would not object." They both turned to look at her, and she ducked her head shyly, but not before Quinn saw the pleased smile that curved her lips. "I would not object," she said softly. The next few weeks developed into a pattern that Quinn had never experienced before. He would finish his work in Del Rio, whatever odd jobs or courier runs people needed, and then he would ride out to the Lakota camp, bringing supplies he thought they might need and receiving in return warm meals and warmer company. The people of the camp had been suspicious of him at first, this white man who came among them, but Gray Hawk's approval went a long way, and Quinn's genuine respect and interest in their ways went further. He learned to speak basic Lakota, though he mangled the pronunciation more often than not, making the children giggle and the elders shake their heads in fond exasperation. He learned their customs, how to greet people properly, how to sit in council, how to give gifts in a way that honored the recipient. And he spent time with Graceful Rain, always under the watchful eyes of chaperones as propriety demanded, but time nonetheless. They would walk around the camp together, and she would tell him stories of her people, their history and their struggles. She did not hide the harsh realities of what her people faced, the broken treaties and the forced relocations, the hunger and disease that plagued the reservations. "The government wants us to disappear," she said one cold afternoon, as they walked along the ridge overlooking the camp. "They want us to forget who we are, to become like white men, to give up everything that makes us Lakota." Quinn heard the pain in her voice and wished he could deny it, but he had seen too much to claim ignorance. He had seen the way Native people were treated in Del Rio, the casual cruelty and systematic discrimination. He had heard the stories of massacres and broken promises. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing it was inadequate but not knowing what else to say. "I'm sorry for what my people have done to yours." Graceful Rain stopped walking and turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his face. "You are not responsible for what others have done," she said gently. "You can only be responsible for your own actions, your own choices, and you have chosen kindness." Something shifted between them in that moment, some barrier falling away. Quinn reached out without thinking and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, and she did not pull away. They stood there on the ridge as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, holding hands like the young people they were, falling into something that felt dangerously like love. When they returned to camp, Gray Hawk was waiting, and one look at their joined hands told him everything. He called Quinn to his lodge that evening, and Quinn went, trying not to feel like he was walking to his execution. Inside, Gray Hawk sat by the fire, his weathered face thoughtful in the flickering light. He gestured for Quinn to sit, and they sat in silence for several long minutes before the chief spoke. "My daughter cares for you," he said bluntly, "and unless I am much mistaken, you care for her as well." There was no point in denying it. "I do," Quinn said. "Very much." Gray Hawk nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "This is a complicated thing," he said. "A white man and a Lakota woman. Your people will not approve, and some of mine will not either. The path ahead will not be easy." "I know," Quinn said, "but I also know that what I feel for Graceful Rain is real. She's the most remarkable person I've ever met. She's brave and kind and intelligent. She challenges me to be a better man. And if she'll have me, if you'll give your blessing, I want to marry her." The words were out before Quinn had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he knew they were true. He wanted to spend his life with Graceful Rain, wanted to wake up beside her every morning and fall asleep with her in his arms every night. He wanted to build a life together, to face whatever challenges came their way side by side. Gray Hawk studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of fatherly concern. "If you marry my daughter, you will be caught between two worlds," he said, "neither fully accepted by your people nor by mine. Your children will face this struggle even more. They will be called half-breeds, treated as less than by both sides. It will be hard, Quinn Westfield, harder than you can imagine." "I know," Quinn said again, "but I also know that a life without Graceful Rain would be harder still. I love her, sir. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but I love her. And I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of her." Gray Hawk's stern expression softened slightly, and he reached out to clasp Quinn's shoulder. "You are a good man," he said. "My daughter could do far worse, but the decision must be hers. I will not force her into marriage, even a marriage I approve of." Quinn's heart was racing as he left Gray Hawk's lodge and went in search of Graceful Rain. He found her near the edge of camp, looking out at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She turned when she heard his approach, and the look on his face must have told her something significant had happened. "I spoke to your father," Quinn said, taking her hands in his. "I asked him for permission to marry you. He said the decision is yours." Graceful Rain's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Marry," she whispered. "I know it's fast," Quinn rushed on. "I know we haven't known each other long. But Graceful Rain, from the moment I pulled you from that frozen lake, something changed in me. You've become the center of my world. I can't imagine my life without you in it. I love you. God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me. Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a poor cowboy who has nothing to offer but his whole heart?" Tears were streaming down Graceful Rain's face, catching the starlight, and for a terrible moment Quinn thought she was going to say no. Then she laughed, a sound of pure joy, and threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said against his shoulder. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Quinn. I think I started loving you the moment I woke up in your cabin and saw the kindness in your eyes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Quinn lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as relief and joy flooded through him. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time. A gentle, reverent kiss that tasted of tears and laughter and promise. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a blending of Lakota and Christian traditions that some people on both sides found scandalous, but which felt right to Quinn and Graceful Rain. Gray Hawk officiated the Lakota portion, a beautiful ceremony that involved the exchange of gifts and the binding of their hands with strips of soft leather, while prayers were offered to the Great Spirit. The Christian portion was performed by a traveling minister who happened to be passing through Del Rio, a kind older man who asked no questions about why a white cowboy was marrying a native woman, just performed the ceremony with grace and genuine warmth. Not many people came. A few of Quinn's friends from Del Rio showed up, the ones who did not see color when they looked at people, just humanity. Most of Gray Hawk's band attended, though Quinn could see the reservation in some faces, the worry about what this union might mean for their people. But Gray Hawk stood proud beside his daughter, and that was enough to silence most objections. When it was done, when Quinn and Graceful Rain were bound together in the eyes of God and the Great Spirit and the law, such as it was in the Montana Territory in 1884, Quinn felt something settle in his chest that he had not even realized was unsettled. He had found his home, not in a place but in a person, and no force on earth could make him regret that choice. They spent their wedding night in Quinn's cabin, which was now their cabin, and it was everything Quinn had ever dreamed intimacy could be. Graceful Rain came to him without fear or shame, and they explored each other with gentle hands and whispered words, learning the map of each other's bodies, discovering together what brought pleasure and joy. Quinn had waited 24 years for this, and it was worth every moment of that wait. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Graceful Rain traced patterns on Quinn's chest with her fingertips. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn asked, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "The future," she said softly. "Our future. I know it won't be easy." "No," Quinn agreed. "It won't, but we'll face it together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Facing everything together, good and bad." Graceful Rain smiled and kissed him. "Together," she agreed. The first real test of their marriage came sooner than either of them had hoped. Spring arrived, bringing with it the thaw and the need for Gray Hawk's band to move north to their summer grounds. The invitation was extended to Quinn and Graceful Rain to come with them, and Quinn was tempted, but he also knew he needed to maintain ties with Del Rio, needed to keep working to build a life that could support a family. They decided to split their time, spending the warm months with Gray Hawk's people and the winters in the cabin, and this compromise seemed to satisfy everyone, though it was not ideal. The goodbyes when Gray Hawk's band departed were tearful, particularly between Graceful Rain and her father, who had never been separated from his daughter for any significant length of time. "Take care of her," Gray Hawk said to Quinn, clasping his shoulder in a gesture that had become familiar over the past weeks. "She is my heart walking outside my body." "I will," Quinn promised, "with my life," and he meant it. Over the following months, as spring turned to summer and summer began its slide toward autumn, Quinn worked harder than he ever had before. He took every job offered, worked from dawn to dusk, building up savings so he could expand the cabin, make it a real home for Graceful Rain, and the children they both hoped to have someday. The people of Del Rio had mixed reactions to his marriage. Some refused to acknowledge Graceful Rain when they saw her, crossing the street to avoid her or muttering slurs under their breath. Others were merely coolly polite, making it clear they disapproved but were too well-mannered to say so outright. But a few, the ones Quinn came to think of as true friends, welcomed Graceful Rain warmly and made efforts to include her in community life. Graceful Rain handled it all with a grace and dignity that made Quinn love her even more. She never let the cruelty make her cruel in turn, never responded to hatred with hatred. She simply continued being herself, kind and generous and strong, and slowly, very slowly, she began to win people over. The turning point came in August, when a fire broke out in the general store in the middle of the night. The store owner's daughter, a girl of maybe 7, was trapped in the apartment above the shop, cut off by flames that were spreading too fast for the bucket brigade to control. Everyone was shouting, panicking, but no one was doing anything, too afraid to risk their own lives. Graceful Rain did not hesitate. She grabbed a blanket from someone's horse, dunked it in one of the water buckets, and ran toward the building before Quinn could stop her. He watched in terror as she disappeared into the smoke and flames, his heart in his throat, praying to every god he knew that she would come out again. She did. Moments later, the little girl wrapped in the wet blanket, both of them coughing and covered in soot but alive. The fire eventually consumed the store, but the girl was safe, and her parents were sobbing their gratitude, calling Graceful Rain a hero. After that night, something changed in Del Rio. People who had refused to speak to Graceful Rain before went out of their way to greet her. The store owner's wife brought food to the cabin every week for months, unable to adequately express her gratitude any other way. Children who had been taught to fear native people started waving to Graceful Rain in the street, drawn by her gentle nature and ready smile. It was not perfect. There were still people who clung to their prejudices, who saw Graceful Rain as less than human because of her heritage. But it was progress, and Quinn and Graceful Rain celebrated every small victory, every smile, every moment of genuine connection. Fall arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and with it came word that Gray Hawk's band was making their way back south. Quinn and Graceful Rain prepared to join them for the winter, and Quinn felt a stirring of excitement at the prospect. He had missed the community of the camp, the sense of belonging he had found among Graceful Rain's people. When they reunited with the band in late October, the reception was warm and joyful. Gray Hawk embraced his daughter tightly, then pulled Quinn into the embrace as well, calling him son in Lakota, a word that made Quinn's throat tight with emotion. That winter was hard in terms of weather, with more snow than anyone could remember and temperatures that dropped so low that water froze solid within minutes of being exposed to the air. But it was also one of the happiest times of Quinn's life. He and Graceful Rain lived in a lodge near her father's, surrounded by family and community, and Quinn threw himself into learning everything he could about Lakota ways. He hunted with the men, learning tracking skills that far surpassed anything he had known before. He sat in council meetings, listening more than speaking, understanding that his presence there was a privilege not to be taken lightly. He played with the children, letting them teach him their games and laughing at his own clumsiness. And at night, he would return to the lodge he shared with Graceful Rain, and they would lie together under piles of furs, talking about their day, making plans for the future, losing themselves in each other's arms. It was during this winter that Graceful Rain discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinn on a night when the northern lights were dancing across the sky, visible through the smoke hole at the top of their lodge. He had been drowsing, content and warm, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a life here," she said softly. "Our child." Growing inside me. Quinn was up in an instant, wide awake, his hand splayed protectively across her abdomen. "A baby," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "We're having a baby." Graceful Rain laughed at his reaction, at the mixture of joy and terror on his face. "Yes," she said. "In the summer, I think. Are you happy?" "Happy." Quinn pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. "I'm terrified and thrilled and so full of love I think my heart might burst. A baby. Our baby. God, Graceful Rain, we're going to be parents." They told Gray Hawk the next morning, and the stern chief's face split into the widest smile Quinn had ever seen. He pulled his daughter into his arms, speaking in rapid Lakota, and though Quinn could not catch all the words, he understood the emotion behind them. Gray Hawk was going to be a grandfather, and he could not have been more delighted. The winter passed, giving way to spring, and Quinn and Graceful Rain returned to their cabin to prepare for the baby's arrival. Quinn expanded the cabin, adding a second room that would serve as a nursery, and built a proper cradle from pine wood he carefully sanded until it was smooth as silk. Graceful Rain sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands never idle, always preparing. As her belly grew, Quinn found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it, by the fact that there was a person growing inside his wife, a person they had made together. He would lie with his head on her stomach at night, talking to the baby, telling it stories about its mother's bravery and its grandfather's wisdom and the world it would soon enter. The baby came in July, during a thunderstorm that shook the cabin walls and made the windows rattle. Graceful Rain labored for hours, attended by 2 women from the camp who had experience with births, while Quinn paced outside in the rain, useless and terrified. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, thin and indignant, Quinn burst back into the cabin, not caring about the propriety of it. Graceful Rain was propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty, her hair plastered to her forehead, and she had never looked more beautiful. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Quinn saw his son for the first time. "A boy," one of the women said, smiling at Quinn's stunned expression. "A healthy son." Quinn approached on shaking legs, lowering himself to sit beside Graceful Rain on the bed. The baby had a full head of dark hair and skin that was a beautiful blend of Quinn's fairness and Graceful Rain's brown. His eyes were squeezed shut, his little face scrunched up, and Quinn fell in love instantly and completely. "Hi there, little one," he whispered, reaching out to touch the impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb, gripping with surprising strength, and Quinn felt tears spill down his cheeks. "I'm your father, and I promise you, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you have a good life, a better life than I had. I promise." They named him Quentin Henry Westfield, a name that honored Quinn's father and Gray Hawk both. When Gray Hawk arrived 3 days later, having ridden hard upon receiving word that his grandson had been born, he held the baby with surprising gentleness for such a fierce warrior, speaking to him in Lakota and English both. "You are blessed, little one," Gray Hawk said to his grandson. "You carry the blood of two peoples in your veins. This will not always be easy, but it makes you strong. You are a bridge between worlds, and that is a sacred thing." Quinn understood what Gray Hawk was saying, understood the challenges his son would face growing up mixed race in a world that often demanded people choose one identity or the other. But he also knew that Quentin would have love, would have a family that spanned cultures and traditions, and that love would be armor against whatever hatred the world threw at him. The years that followed were good ones, full of the joy and chaos that comes with raising children. Graceful Rain became pregnant again when Quentin was 2, and this time they had a daughter, whom they named Gabrielle Hope Westfield. 2 years after that came another son, quieter than his boisterous older brother but no less loved. They named him Thomas, after the old man Quinn had been bringing medicine to the night he saved Graceful Rain from the frozen lake. The cabin was expanded again and again, growing from 1 room to 2 to 4, as Quinn's skills as a carpenter improved and their family grew. He built a barn for the horses and a chicken coop for the hens Graceful Rain insisted on raising. He cleared land for a vegetable garden and helped Graceful Rain plant traditional Three Sisters crops of corn, beans, and squash alongside more typical garden vegetables. They split their time between the cabin and Gray Hawk's camp, and the children grew up fluent in both English and Lakota, comfortable in both worlds. It was not always easy. There were incidents in Del Rio, children who called Quentin and Gabrielle and Thomas names, adults who treated them with suspicion or outright hostility. But there were also friends, people who saw beyond skin color to the bright, loving children underneath. In the camp, the children were embraced fully, taught the traditions and stories of their mother's people. Quentin became an excellent rider and hunter. Gabrielle showed a gift for healing, often following Gray Hawk around as the chief used his knowledge of traditional medicine to help his people. Thomas was quieter but showed an artistic talent, drawing pictures of the world around him with charcoal on any surface he could find. Quinn and Graceful Rain watched their children grow with pride and love, facing each challenge as it came, always united, always strong. Their love had not dimmed over the years, but had deepened, matured into something solid and unshakable. When Quentin was 10, the United States government intensified its efforts to force all Native people onto reservations, and Gray Hawk's band faced pressure to move to the reservation in South Dakota. It was a devastating prospect, giving up their freedom to roam, their traditional way of life. But the alternative was military force, and Gray Hawk was wise enough to know that direct confrontation with the army would only lead to the destruction of his people. The decision weighed heavily on the chief, and Quinn watched as his father-in-law seemed to age years in a matter of months. Finally, one night around the fire, Gray Hawk asked Quinn's opinion. "What would you do," he asked, "if you were in my position?" Quinn considered carefully before answering. "I would think of the children," he said. "Not just my own, but all the children of our people. What kind of future will they have? On the reservation, life will be hard and much will be taken from us, but we will survive. We can hold onto our culture, our language, our stories. We can adapt and endure. If we fight, if we refuse, the army will come and the children may not survive at all. Gray Hawk nodded slowly. This is what I think also, he said, but it is a hard thing to give up freedom for survival. The hardest thing, Quinn agreed. But you are a wise leader. Your people trust you. Whatever you decide, they will follow. In the end, Gray Hawk decided to lead his people to the reservation, but not before securing promises from Quinn and Graceful Rain. I need to know that the old ways will not die, he said. I need to know that someone will remember, will teach the children who we were before all this. We will, Graceful Rain promised, taking her father's weathered hands in her own. We will teach our children, and they will teach theirs. The stories will not be forgotten. Quinn and Graceful Rain did not move to the reservation with the band. The restrictions there would have made Quinn's presence problematic at best, and the thought of being confined, of losing their freedom to come and go, was unbearable. Instead, they stayed at the cabin, but they visited the reservation regularly, bringing supplies and news from the outside world. Gray Hawk adapted to reservation life with the same grace he brought to everything. But Quinn could see it was killing him slowly, the loss of freedom and dignity. The chief grew thinner, more tired, though he never complained. He threw himself into teaching the young people, making sure they learned the old stories, the old ways, even as the government schools tried to strip all trace of native identity from the children. When Gray Hawk died in the winter of 1899, at the age of 68, it felt like the end of an era. Quinn and Graceful Rain mourned deeply, and their children, who had loved their grandfather fiercely, were devastated. They buried him in the traditional way, in a scaffold burial in the hills outside the reservation, and Quinn spoke at the ceremony, his Lakota halting but sincere. "You taught me what it means to be a man of honor," he said to the wrapped body of his father-in-law. "You welcomed me when you had every reason to turn me away. You trusted me with your daughter, your greatest treasure. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that trust. Travel well, grandfather. We will remember you." The years continued to pass. Quentin grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, and fell in love with a girl from Del Rio, a farmer's daughter with red hair and a laugh like bells. They married when Quentin was 22, and Quinn stood beside his son with pride, thinking back to his own wedding day and how young and uncertain he had been. Gabrielle showed no interest in marriage, instead dedicating herself to healing. She studied with every doctor or medicine person who would teach her, combining traditional Lakota healing practices with modern medicine, and became known throughout the territory as someone who could help when others could not. Thomas surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school near the reservation where Native children could learn to read and write and do arithmetic without being punished for speaking their own language or practicing their own customs. It was dangerous work in some ways, running counter to government policy, but Thomas was clever and determined, and he made it work. Quinn and Graceful Rain became grandparents, then grandparents again, watching their family tree spread and grow. They aged together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes and mouths, but their love remained constant. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinn took Graceful Rain back to Mirror Lake, to the spot where he had pulled her from the ice all those years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked her as they stood hand in hand, looking at the frozen surface. "Marrying me, choosing this life, it hasn't been easy." Graceful Rain turned to look at him, and her dark eyes were as beautiful as the day he first saw them. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "You gave me a life full of love and purpose and joy. You gave me beautiful children and a partnership that has sustained me through everything. How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" Quinn pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness of their early days. "I love you," he said against her lips. "More every day. You are my heart, Graceful Rain. You always will be." They lived many more years together, growing old in the cabin they had made into a home, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Quinn never did become wealthy, never made his fortune in gold or cattle or any of the other things that drew men west. But he had something more valuable than gold. He had love, deep and true and lasting. When Quinn died at the age of 71, peacefully in his sleep after a day spent working in the garden he still tended every summer, Graceful Rain mourned but did not despair. She knew they had been blessed, had been given more years together than many people ever got. She continued living in their cabin, cared for by their children and grandchildren, telling stories of Quinn to anyone who would listen. "He was a good man," she would say, her voice still strong despite her age. "He saw past color and culture to the person underneath. He taught our children to do the same. In a world full of hatred and fear, he chose love. That is his legacy." Graceful Rain lived to be 78, passing quietly in her sleep in the cabin she and Quinn had shared for so many years. Her children buried her beside Quinn on a hill overlooking Mirror Lake, where their love story had begun. They placed markers there, simple wooden crosses with their names and dates, and every year on the anniversary of their deaths, the family would gather to remember and give thanks. The story of Quinn and Graceful Rain became legend in that part of Montana, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But the truth at the heart of it never changed. That a cowboy had saved a native girl from a frozen lake, that her chief had stood at his door the next morning, and that, from those dramatic beginnings, had grown a love that transcended culture and prejudice, and all the divisions that humans erected between themselves. Their descendants carried forward the lessons Quinn and Graceful Rain had taught them. That love was stronger than hate. That courage meant standing up for what was right even when it was hard. That family was not defined by blood alone, but by bonds of affection and respect and shared values. The cabin still stood decades later, maintained by generations of Westfields who saw it as a sacred place, a reminder of where they came from and the love that had made their existence possible. And sometimes, on cold winter nights when the northern lights danced across the Montana sky, people claimed they could see two figures walking hand in hand along the shore of Mirror Lake, still together even in death, still writing their love story across the stars. The frozen lake that had nearly claimed Graceful Rain's life had instead become the birthplace of a love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of one man's choice to dive into icy water to save a stranger, and one woman's choice to open her heart to the man who saved her. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, dramatic and dangerous and ultimately triumphant, and it would be remembered long after the last traces of that frontier time had faded into history.